Hello, welcome everyone. We'll give it a few more moments for folks to trickle in. Hope you're all doing well. We'll give it another minute before we start, but thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to have you. Awesome. Seeing the time, and the fact that we have so many great things that we want to share with you today. We will slowly kick things off. So, thank you again all for joining us today. My name is Ayat, and I work as an outreach advisor with the Green Municipal Fund, and I work specifically on our Adaptation in Action offer. So, I'm pleased to be with you today, and I'm joined by my colleague Taryn, who is a funding advisor for the Adaptation in Action stream, as well as Emma and Mo, who are working their magic on the production side of things. So thanks again to both of you. And welcome to everyone on this webinar. We'll be talking about different ways that you can strengthen your adaptation and action implementation project application. So Taryn and I will guide you through some tips and tricks and things that you can do to provide you some insight into how to strengthen your application. All right, so before we dive in, a few housekeeping items to get through. So today's event will be taking place in English and French with simultaneous interpretation available in both languages. Kudos to our interpreter on the call. Thank you for all the work you do. So to join the English interpretation, you can click the English interpretation button in the lower right of your screen. It's a little globe, and then click on English. Donc, bonjour tout le monde pour tous les francophones qui se joignent à nous aujourd'hui. Donc, il va y avoir certaines sections de la présentation aujourd'hui qui vont être en français, d'autres qui seront en anglais. Donc, si vous souhaitez écouter la présentation en français, je vous invite à cliquer sur le bouton d'interprétation en bas à droite de votre écran. C'est un petit globe, puis vous pouvez sélectionner l'option en français. We have two separate decks, slide decks, one in English and one in French. You'll see these options at the top of your screen, so you can switch between the two. And as we move through our presentation today, you're welcome to submit your questions in the Q&A box as they come up in French or in English, and we'll address them as they come through the chat. And we'll also have some time at the end to go over some of those questions. Donc, encore une invitation à vous, si vous souhaitez soumettre vos questions en français, n'hésitez pas. All right, and we'll keep an eye out also for any clarification questions that can be addressed during the presentation. Wonderful. So we can go to the next one. Thank you, Emma and Mo. Great. So the photo that you see up on the screen was taken a few weeks ago, just before the leaves started coming out. So this is a local forest that's not too far from where I live that I get the chance to visit, to go on long walks with my dog, to see the seasons change. I live in Tiohtià:ke, so that's the Mohawk name for what's colonially known and referred to as Montreal. I'm a guest here on this land, living, working, playing on the unceded traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. This week, I had the chance of attending the Climate West Forum in Winnipeg. And as part of today's session, I'd like to invite you to check out the really inspiring work that the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources have done. So they've done great work with First Nation communities advancing two-eyed seeing climate adaptation solutions. So yeah, really awesome work. And I'll invite, if we can ask you, Emma, to drop the link in the chat to the website of the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources. Beautiful. Thank you for that. So moving on. to our agenda for today. So if you can just, yeah, great, thank you. The webinar is structured in two parts. So the first part, we'll get to hang out together and talk about the what of our funding offer. So what kind of funding is available, what type of projects can support or can we offer through this funding program. And in the second part, once we're done talking about the what, we'll dive a little bit more into the how. So looking at how you can strengthen your adaptation and action application and as well as some tips and tricks on how to avoid some of the common mistakes. And we'll wrap all of this up with a Q&A period at the end. Awesome. So to anchor us in today's webinar, I should say, we'll kick things off by kind of having a feel for the room and seeing what climate hazards are top of mind for your community at the moment. So thank you to, again, Mo and Emma for launching the poll. That's great. You'll have a few options there. And we'll give it a minute for you to think about what is the climate hazard that is top of mind for your community at the moment. Great. Give it a few more seconds. And then I think when it closes, I'll get to see some of the answers. Wonderful. Yeah, great. I'm seeing a lot of different hazards in there. Flooding is the one that is the top here, with the next one following being extreme temperatures, followed by extreme weather. So this is a really kind of a really nice segue into our offer, to the adaptation and action offer, which is really designed to support a number of different projects and to really support you in doing the work that you've already started doing and continuing the momentum on the projects that you may already be working on or that you're wanting to work on more closely. So we can go to the next slide. Yep, even the next one. That's perfect. Thank you. Wonderful, thanks. So across our LLC offer are five cross-cutting themes: equity, reconciliation, collaboration, nature-based solutions, and low carbon resiliency. So all of these themes are embedded not only in our design offer, but you'll also see later in the webinar that these are themes that are also financially incentivized. So I'd like to take just a moment here to highlight the theme of equity. It's at the very heart of how our offer was designed and structured. So this is really an important step towards creating an equitable climate adaptation, but also creating an equitable future for all. So it really starts from a place where recognizing that marginalized communities and equity deserving groups are the most vulnerable and often the most impacted by climate change. So any project or action designed to build resiliency should really center equity at the forefront. And we'll see this a little bit more in the next upcoming slide and the following ones as well. So for today's webinar, again, we're really focusing on the implementation section of adaptation and action. So within our offer, it's really structured for communities who are already aware of their climate risks and know which projects are going to help them make the greatest improvements in their climate resiliency. So meaning that in order to unlock funding under adaptation and action, your community must have completed a climate adaptation plan or a risk assessment, either at the community level or it can also be at the regional level. We can get into those details if you have any questions around that. So we can support through adaptation and action, again, two types of projects, feasibility study and implementation projects. And today we'll really focus on the implementation project section. So you can really kind of pick your own adventure. If you've done some feasibility study work within your municipality already, you can hop right into the implementation project. So another key piece towards unlocking funding for implementation project is that you must have completed a feasibility study in order to access implementation funding. So we'll go right to the next one. And I'll speak a little bit more to what I was just mentioning as one of the keys to unlocking implementation project funding is that you'll need to your project will need to be connected to your community's either climate adaptation plan or risk assessment. And really, why we're asking this is see this as kind of your decisional backbone that will support you in really making the case, the business case for your project. So it demonstrates that the proposed project that you're submitting is grounded in local priorities and local risks and aligns with your long-term resiliency goals. So again, a foundational piece there really to align both. Awesome. We'll go to the next one. Thank you. So diving quickly into the available funding, you have all the nitty-gritty in the application guide. Emma, if you don't mind dropping the link for those in the chat, that would be wonderful. So you'll have all of those details. So I won't take up too much time today to walk through those, but essentially the things that you need to know for implementation projects is that these must be on the ground projects that have the immediate potential to reduce climate risks upon completion. So you have up to 3 years to complete your project, and we're really looking for that climate risk reduction potential of the project. And an important note, again, for implementation project, so the project can't exceed 1 million in eligible costs. So it's designed for smaller capital projects, but other scopes of work are permissible. Super, je vais faire les prochaines diapositives en français. Donc, pour préserver un accès équitable au financement partout au Canada pour toute la durée de l'initiative, en fonction de la taille de votre municipalité, vous pouvez avoir accès jusqu'à un maximum de 3 projets de mise en œuvre, 3 études de faisabilité. Une chose qu'il faut tenir en tête, c'est que ce pas des garanties. Donc, les projets doivent, bien entendu, satisfaire à nos critères d'admissibilité et obtenir une évaluation favorable. Donc, on vous invite à garder ces chiffres-là en tête. On peut aller à la prochaine diapositive pour vous annoncer une nouvelle qu'on est bien heureux de partager avec vous aujourd'hui. Donc, la FCM et le ministère des Affaires municipales et de l'Habitation, on a conclu un accord pour que le FCM puisse financer directement les projets d'adaptation pour les municipalités du Québec à compter du 27 mai. Donc, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire concrètement? Ça veut dire que les municipalités du Québec pourront appliquer directement au financement de LLAC. Donc, on est très heureux d'annoncer ça. Vous allez voir aussi, dans le fond, à partir du 27 mai, on va être en mesure de vous donner un peu plus d'informations. Vous allez voir sur le site web aussi que les mêmes informations qui sont sur la diapositive sont communiquées. Donc, on vous invite à garder l'œil bien ouvert et à prendre rendez-vous avec nous pour discuter de votre projet. Ça va nous faire grand plaisir. Super, je passe à la prochaine section. Excellent. Et puis, dans cette prochaine section, on va vous offrir quelques pistes de réflexion pour vous aider à réfléchir quel projet prioriser au sein de votre municipalité ou de votre communauté. Donc, on va voir sur la prochaine diapositive. La première piste de réflexion qu'on aimerait vous proposer, c'est l'alignement de votre projet avec les critères d'évaluation du programme. Donc, vous allez remarquer que le critère le plus fortement pondéré, c'est de faire le lien entre le projet ou le potentiel du projet à réduire les risques climatiques. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a 60%, pardon, 70% de votre projet qui va être basé sur ce critère-là. Donc, à quel point est-ce que votre projet permet de répondre clairement à un aléa climatique spécifique? Est-ce que l'objectif de votre projet est de réduire un risque climatique? C'est vraiment sur ces aspects-là, que cette occasion de financement-là a été structurée. Donc, bien important d'avoir cela en tête. Et vous allez voir les petits diagrammes qu'il y a à l'écran. Donc, à l'issue de votre projet, il devrait avoir des retombées positives là, dans une des trois sphères qui sont à l'écran. Ou peut-être que je n'aurais pas dire sphère parce que c'est pas des ronds, mais une des trois petits carrés à l'écran. Donc, une infrastructure plus résiliente, écosystème plus résilient ou un bien-être communautaire qui a été augmenté. On peut aller à la prochaine. And I'm going to continue in English. Je vais poursuivre en anglais. So again, another key component, so aligning the project with the evaluation criteria is something that we'd like to bring forward in helping you think and prioritize projects. So you'll see that we've introduced a new self-assessment section on equity. So this section allows you to select where you situate this project on the spectrum. So strong equity-driven projects are one where equity shapes the project purposes, drives site selection, and influences the design and delivery of the project. So in the image that you see up on the screen right now, a project that self-assess as good or excellent and provide the necessary justification or explanation will be considered for an additional cost share of 10%. So again, as I was mentioning at the beginning, these are core components of our offer that are financially incentivized as well. And one important note on this slide is that the results of this question will not be used to determine eligibility or prioritization of applications. So regardless of where you are on the scale, this will not be used to determine the eligibility of your project. The scale here is really to help you think about these elements and really encourage you to include them in your project design where possible. And again, if your project meets the good or excellent score, that is grounds for considering the cost share increase of 10%. All right. Okay, I'll move to the next one. I am mindful of time and we've got still some great content to share. So another consideration we'd like to share for project prioritization is considering your project's readiness state. So have you completed a feasibility study for this project, which again is a requirement to access implementation funding? Again, what exactly must be in a feasibility study? You'll find that in the application guide. So I'll invite you to look at that and also consider, is there buy-in at the municipal level for the project? Is there a champion that can help you move this project through? And have all the necessary resources been identified and are they available? So a few different reflection prompts to help you in your project prioritization. We can go to the next one here. The next consideration that we'd like to share is around the cost of your project. So as mentioned earlier, the adaptation and action implementation stream is really designed to support smaller scale capital projects. So will the eligible expenses of your project be under $1 million? That's a really important one to keep in mind, and that will help you also work through your list of projects and help you prioritize them. All right, getting into project examples. So we'll share two projects examples with you today, just to kind of give you a bit of a taste of the diversity of projects that we can support. And we'll share with you specifically what we loved about those projects. So the first one that you'll see up on the screen is in BC, in West Vancouver. What we really loved about this project, so this one addressed wildfire as a hazard. What we really loved about this project is that the climate adaptation plan clearly identified the importance of wildfire mitigation to keep the population safe. So that's something that we really love, the strong, robust alignment between the community's climate adaptation plan and their proposed projects. So really making that strong business case for the project. Another element we loved about this project is that it protected two critical infrastructures, so both drinking water source and water treatment plant, while also protecting high-risk neighborhoods. And I was going to say the last element, but there's a lot of great things we loved about the project. But one other I'll share is that the project helped balance wildfire risk reduction with biodiversity integrity. So maintaining mature canopy, healthy trees and shrubs. And the next one you'll see is a bit different. So we're moving from wildfire risk. This one is looking at addressing different climate hazards, so flooding, erosion, and sea level rise, and comes to us from Annapolis Rural in Nova Scotia. And we loved that this project clearly had clear biodiversity and ecosystem restoration benefits. So through march restoration, they reestablished a vital habitat for both fish and vertebrates, bird species. It's also a proven nature-based solution that reduces wave energy and erosion. So great to see that alignment as well. And for this particular project, they integrated salt marsh restoration, and they did that in front of a seawall. So kind of combining the benefits of engineered protection, so more hardscape solution with a nature-based solution. So again, delivering that risk reduction benefits combined with biodiversity gains. So really, really great example there of a nature-based project. Cool. So we'll take a little moment here to I'm not sure if I like the word quiz. I know I'm the one that put it, but quiz may sound a little bit hopefully you feel it as a friendly quiz. Just to check and to see where we're at in terms of integration of some of the things that we've shared. So I think this will launch a poll, hopefully, and a question that you'll see up on the screen. So if we can just go to the next slide, and hopefully that'll prompt the question, or maybe it's in the poll already. Yeah, wonderful. So I'll leave it a few seconds for. Oh, oh, thank you. Yes. Thank you, Emma, for that reminder. So no poll. We're just asking you to send your answers via chat. So yes or no question. So if Indigenous, I'll read it out loud. If Indigenous reconciliation and AREI considerations drive site selection and the prioritization of the project focus, would that project score higher? So you're welcome to answer yes or no in the chat. Wonderful. Seeing some answers come through. Thank you. Great. All right. I think we can reveal the answer. So the answer would be yes. So it would qualify for potential for a higher score and would also make the project eligible for a higher cost share. Again, I want to take a moment here to say that equity consideration will not be used to determine the eligibility of your project. But again, it can lead to an increased cost share there. So I will turn it over. Thank you, everyone, for your answers, and I will turn it over to my colleague Taryn, getting into the how section and sharing some tips and tricks. So over to you, Taryn.
Thanks, Agat. Can you give me a thumbs up if my voice is coming out through okay? Yeah. Okay, awesome. All right, so we're going to talk about some tips and tricks that you can use to make sure you have a good application. And that way, usually when we're reviewing the application, leads to less hiccups in that review process. So kind of getting it right from the jump. So if we could go to the next slide. So let's get into some key considerations to make in order to build a strong application. One of the main factors to consider is that the project should have a very clear scope and clear objectives. This is one of the initial and primary criteria that we review on our end when an application is submitted is the scope clear or is there a clear focus to the actual project itself? For implementation projects, which is kind of the focus of my section of the presentation, we want to see that the project demonstrates a high level of alignment with specific climate risks that you've identified in the target area where the project would be taking place. So objectives must directly target the most pressing risks or show that the project is working to resolve actions identified in your municipal climate adaptation plan. So applications are going to be assessed on whether they have a clear, specific, and evidence-based objective that's related to reducing climate-related risks for at least one beneficiary, which includes community well-being, ecosystems, or it could be municipal systems or services. So we want to see what is it that the project is going to benefit as well. So one of the points that we noted in the first two rounds of funding that have already taken place is that applications did not have sufficient project descriptions. So applicants didn't take advantage of the full character limit that we have in this section of our application form, meaning that a lot of the answers lacked detail, they lacked essential like key points. They only kind of provided a few sentences describing their projects. So we really want to encourage you to take advantage of the character limit and add more detail, even if the detail is just regarding the community itself and how the project is going to benefit the community. With regards to the alignment with the climate action plan, sorry, the primary advice would be that when filling out the application form, if you check off a specific climate risk in the form, it'll be similar to the ones we looked at in the initial pop-up that came where it listed your primary concerns, environmental concerns. When you're listing that off in your application, there should be a few sentences in your application that elaborate on how the project is actually going to mitigate those risks. If you can't describe how you're going to mitigate that risk, then don't check those ones off. We just want to know what's relevant to that project. Another tip would be to reference where in the action plan the project aligns with. So this helps on our end to just be able to jump to that page and see where that alignment is taking place. Next slide, please. So I also want to take some time to give a quick overview of which factors can result in a higher score for an application. Higher score means it's more likely to be approved for funding. So the first point that you see here is projects that address high and or very high risks, meaning that the project is going to be aligned with one or more priority risks from the climate risk assessment or aligned with actions identified in your municipal climate adaptation plan. So majority of the evaluation marks for applications in the risk reduction opportunity category, that's where majority of them come from. So it's important to thoroughly cover this component in your application. Um, a demonstrated commitment to minimizing carbon emissions. So this is another important one. It's a little bit trickier because emissions are not always going to be the focus of an adaptation project, but we consider it an important component. So I'll go over a few examples of what can be considered in an upcoming slide to kind of give you an idea. And then third, outlining the benefits of climate risk reduction for equity deserving or marginalized groups within your community. And then the fourth one is nature-based solutions, which are ways of using natural systems, for example, like forests, wetlands, rivers, or green spaces, to help solve human challenges like climate change, flooding, urban heat. And we can get into that a little bit later too. Next slide, please. So cost share incentives. So one of the reasons you might consider incorporating or including these factors that we discussed in your project is not only for the higher score, but like Agat mentioned, we also could potentially give you a higher cost share. So that means a higher percentage of your eligible project costs would be covered by the funding provided by FCM. So cost share incentives, the ones that we have here for implementation projects, LLCA will contribute up to 60% of total eligible costs. However, the cost share can be increased by addressing the following strategic priorities that you see listed on the slide there. So I'll just do a quick readout of them. So you can get an additional 10% if an Indigenous community or a local government is applying in partnership with another Indigenous community or projects that involve collaboration between two or more municipal governments. So a letter of support is needed to be able to access that particular collaboration incentive. The second one here is a rural or remote community or municipality, and that would be one with population below 10,000 as we've defined it. And then another additional 10% for projects that meaningfully address anti-racism, equity, and reconciliation. And I'll go into some detail about how you can address this in an upcoming slide as well. And then an additional 10% for projects that emphasize nature-based solutions. So each priority is stackable. If you were to meet all four priorities, you could receive up to 100% cost share on eligible expenses. So that's a really great incentive to try and include these strategies or factors into your project. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I just wanted to get into the partnership piece a little bit. As you saw on the last slide, there is a 10% cost share incentive for projects that involve partnership between two or more local governments, including Indigenous governments. So the reason we're highlighting this on its own slide is because during the last round of funding, there was some confusion as to what actually constitutes a partnership when applying to the adaptation and action funding. And there were many communities that had another municipality tag on as a partner on paper in order to receive the cost share incentive. But in reality, the partner might not have been making any material contribution towards the project. So I just want to emphasize that in order to be considered for that incentive, the partnership should be jointly delivering a shared on the ground outcome where each makes a material contribution that is essential to strengthening your project. So this could be a financial contribution. It could be staff time that's dedicated towards the project. There's a lot of examples of how this can take place, and each partner should realize some sort of measurable improvement to climate resilience as a result of the project. So that would be important. And this is in addition to actually having that partnership letter confirmation that we require as well. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go through some common pitfalls. So since we've gone through two rounds of funding for this particular program, there's a lot of lessons learned from the projects and applications that came through. And when we were reviewing the previous applications, we were able to narrow down a few specific pitfalls or areas where applications were maybe not as strong as they could be, areas of improvement, essentially. So I'm going to go over some of the pitfalls with you and then provide suggestions on how you can avoid them when you're working through your application. So you'll see the first one here is equity. So many applications described very generic equity considerations rather than specific ones. So what we're looking for here is that the project demonstrates a very comprehensive and explicit focus on equity deserving groups. Equity deserving groups are communities that have historically faced systemic barriers or equal access, or sorry, to equal access or opportunities due to discrimination or marginalization. So an example of equity deserving groups includes Indigenous communities. It could include low income individuals or people with disabilities. So the project should not only identify these groups, but always also incorporate targeted strategies to address the specific needs and vulnerabilities in the context of climate adaptation. So what we saw a lot of in the last round of funding was projects just claiming benefits for the entire population of a community or municipality which sort of misses the point of equity considerations, which is that not everyone benefits equally and that certain populations will need additional support. So just keeping that in mind when you're working on the equity portion of your project. The second point here that I touched on earlier is the low carbon adaptation. So this section, sorry, again, was quite weak across a lot of our applications. And that, again, is often because emissions, like we chatted about before, is not the primary focus of an adaptation project. We want to see that the project shows a commitment to minimizing carbon emissions and embodied carbon across all stages. And so some of the common approaches that you could consider would be something like embodied carbon from any building materials, the use of high efficiency equipment, either as a part of the project or during the implementation of it, the role of natural infrastructure in carbon sequestration, for backup power plants, the consideration of biofuel, feedstocks, renewable natural gas, battery systems. Um, so these are just some examples of what could be incorporated. You can also always chat with us too. If you have an idea of what could be a project and you want to see where those things could be considered, our outreach team is always available to chat with you to kind of figure out where these things could be considered. Next slide, please. So we touched on risks and identifying risks, but I wanted to focus on risk management of your project. So what do we mean by risk management? It's basically the process of identifying, assessing, and prioritizing risks, and then followed by coordinated efforts to minimize and control the probability or impact of unfortunate events, essentially. So these risks are going to be associated with undertaking your project. A remarkably high number of the projects only included a single risk in this section of the application form. So at bare minimum, I think nearly every project could include some financial risk. So, for example, your costs increase and they were not budgeted for. So that would be an example of a risk. There could be schedule risks. So there's changes to your project timelines or result-based risks. So project didn't achieve the expected results. So those are potential risks that I think every project probably could include. And then, of course, depending on the nature of your project, there might be other ones as well that you could include. To score high in this criteria, there should be no concerns with the risk management portion of your project. So where we feel like you have suitably identified and assessed all the relevant risks and have developed mitigation plans that fit within the scope of your project to address those risks. And then file completeness as well. This was a very common problem with the applications that come to us that are missing key supporting documentation or information that we require to be able to approve the project or move it forward in our review process. And a part of that might be because there are quite a few documents that we require, especially with your full application. So it's easy to lose one in the bunch or forget to submit it. Generally speaking, what you'll need to submit with your implementation project application is a completed workbook, confirmed your sources of funding, a climate risk assessment or adaptation plan, and a feasibility study. There might be other documents as well, depending on your organization type. For example, if you're non-municipal, and or depending on the project type. So if it's a new infrastructure project, there might be some additional considerations as well. Appendix E in our application guide that was linked in the chat is a great resource to organize your application and be able to make maybe like a checklist of what you need to submit your application. Another great resource is our outreach team. So if you're ever in the process of putting together your submission, you're not sure if it fits the bill or if you have all the necessary information, you can reach out to our outreach team directly by email or scheduling a call, and they can walk you through the requirements as well. We'll share how you can get in contact with them at the end of the presentation. Agat is the leader of that for the AIA team, so most likely you'll be chatting with her. Next slide, please. All right, so last but not least is the project workbook. So don't be scared by the screen. I'm going to kind of go through it, and then hopefully when you actually have the full workbook itself. It'll give you a little more context. But this is an Excel sheet basically that we're going to provide to you once your pre-application has been approved and you're moving to the full application stage. The workbook is where you will outline your project budget and work plan, including any major project milestones. The workbook is an area where we tend to have to reach out to applicants quite a bit in order to get clarification or ask additional questions. So we can dig into this a little bit in terms of what it is that we're seeing. So these are a couple snippets that I took out of our workbook. When you have the actual document and you're able to review it in its entirety, it's going to make a little bit more sense. But I just wanted to zone in on a few items so that when you go to complete your workbook, you can be sure to tick certain boxes that are very commonly missed. So in the top left corner of the slide is a section where you fill out your project milestones and the associated start and end dates of your project, as well as cost estimates per milestone. These are estimates, we know that, and I know like logistically projects could change as we work over time. That's okay. Those can be changed if needed. So don't stress that it has to be like exact. If moving forward there are project delays, we can work to adjust those. It's not a big deal, but we want a pretty good estimate of what you're thinking your project timelines are going to be. Always ensure that whatever start and end dates you include in your workbook are also going to match the ones that are listed in your application form. So consistency is important here. Another important factor is related to the dates is the eligibility of cost, the start date of your cost. So technically, any costs that you incur after the submission of your full application are considered eligible. So once that full application is submitted, you can start incurring project costs. However, it's at your own risk because you don't have a project decision at that point. Any costs related to the preparation of your full applications, however, up to 90 days before you actually submit your application are also considered eligible. So that's kind of one of the exceptions. The table at the bottom of the slide there is the sources of funding tab in our workbook. So this is where you would list out the amount of funding from each source, including how much GMF would be contributing and how much the municipality itself would be contributing towards the project. The total funding here needs to match the total from the milestones in the table above there. So again, consistency across the workbook is going to be very important. Yeah, so this might look a little bit confusing. I'm looking at it now. But once you have the workbook, it'll make some sense. If nothing else, just try to remember that the numbers, dates need to be consistent across this particular form as well as with your application. That's sort of the key takeaway here. Next slide, please. All right, so one other section of the workbook that I wanted to highlight is that please include taxes in your budget. This is one thing that applicants often forget to include, and we have to go back to them to get this information. So please include your taxes. Another important point is that you should include contingency costs. So these should be incorporated into your budget items and not listed out as a single cost line. So that's also very important. And lastly, important to note that only the lead applicant, so this would be only relevant if you're coming in with a partnership, but the lead applicant is the only one that can actually incur eligible project costs. If you're partnering with another organization or government, their costs are not eligible unless the project partner actually invoices the lead applicant, lead municipality, in order to get reimbursed for those costs. So they wouldn't be included here as costs that we would reimburse you. It would work basically through the lead applicant. So all funding flows through the lead applicant, which is the entity organization that we would be in agreement with essentially as FCM. So there we have it. These were kind of the four most common pitfalls or areas for improvement, plus the workbook at the end there, that were identified in the first couple rounds of applications. I wanted to give a quick shout out to our project officers who were the ones that reviewed all the applications and were able to help us put these insights together. So hopefully you have a little more context and information that can help you avoid these and help you create a stronger application. That fingers crossed gets approved for funding. So yes, it looks like we're moving on to the Q&A. I know we shared quite a bit of information with you, so if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A box or um, I don't think anybody, yeah, I think it would just go into the chat here. So yeah, if you have any questions, please pop them in and Agat and I will try and work through those and answer as many as we can. I don't know if we have any right now that we can touch on.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can just pop in. We have a question just in the Q&A on the open side. Do confirmed sources of funding letters need to be submitted with a full application, or are they required at the agreement stage if successful?
I can take this one because it's related to the funding process. Yeah. So if you don't have it was the confirmed sources letter, right? Emma, is that was the question?
Yeah,
Okay.
confirmed
Yeah.
sources
So
of funding.
if they don't have them at the application stage, that's okay. We would still move forward with processing your application. And correct, we would want to have those secured before we move forward with signing the agreement. So if it does take you a little more time to procure those, that's okay. As long as we have them before we actually sign the agreement, we should be all good.
Great. I think it's a kind of another relevant question on that realm. Do you need a published slash adopted by council adaptation study to apply for the implementation grant? I think it's easy answer.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. Great question. Thank you. So essentially, when you submit your full application, the adaptation study should be, or sorry, the your adaptation plan should be at a stage where it is completed. So we won't accept any drafts, but if you have made significant progress on it, it's at its final stage, it's completed, there's community buy-in, then we're good to go on that front.
Great. Sorry, I'm trying to, there's another question in the chat that's a little bit of a longer question. I can read it out if that's helpful for you both. Okay. I understand that to qualify for the implementation project, you must have conducted a feasibility study to assess practicality and viability of a project to address climate risk. If the viability of the project to address a climate risk is inherent or broadly known, for example, we know generally that installing a geo-exchange system in a civics center building will provide a safe cooling space for community members and reduce demand on the electricity grid during peak demand in the event of a heat wave. Can the feasibility study simply be a report summarizing the current research showing how geo-exchange systems provide cooling and reduce electricity demand?
I can take a first stab at it, Taryn, and then feel free to add on. So yeah, again, great question. We give the general guidance that for an implementation project, if it's not a full-blown feasibility study, you should still include some elements like the project objective and site should be there, the cost estimate for your project should be there. But I understand that if it's really a project that's looking at upgrading kind of the heating and cooling system for that might serve in case of like an emergency center, heating or cooling center for the community, then a full-blown feasibility study wouldn't necessarily be required. However, we would still need to see like a detailed cost estimate, the rationale for the project, the identified site, what types of updates you're looking to make. So I'd say it really depends on the project scope, but yeah, at minimum, you should be looking to include the cost estimate, the technical feasibility, and project site and objective. So I'll let Taryn if I missed anything or if I misspoke. Um, yeah, okay, awesome. Thanks.
Okay. Moving along, we're getting lots of questions. Please keep them coming. A quick detailed question. Do taxes need to be broken out in the workbook or can they be included in milestone lines? Maybe Taryn.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So yeah, taxes should be broken out. In our workbook, you'll see there is a section just for taxes to be inputted. Typically, it'd be good if you could just separate out refundable taxes versus non-refundable, just because the refundable taxes would be considered ineligible. However, if you have any non-refundable taxes that you'd be paying, for the project, those are covered by our funding. So we just break out those two, that would be great. But otherwise, separate lines for those is the way to go in the workbook.
Perfect. Okay. A question from Michelle. If the municipality has completed studies related to an implementation project with some feasibility information, but not specific to the project, could that qualify as a feasibility study?
Yeah, I can speak to that one. So we're looking for kind of site-specific information to lead to the implementation project. So the feasibility study or the documents that you're submitting as part of your feasibility study should speak to the specificity of the project and the specificity of the site that you've selected. But yeah, great question. Thanks, Michelle.
Great. We don't have any more questions that I see. I encourage people to send them in the Q&A, but in the interim, I'd like to ask a couple questions that we received through the registration. One of which was, can municipalities combine 2 to 3 smaller projects to make a larger application?
Yeah, that's another great question. So, where it makes sense, I'd say yes, and I will further explicit what I mean by that. So, if, for example, you are undertaking a project that is, let's say, within the same watershed and the intervention is looking at addressing the same hazard, then project bundling may make sense in that case. So, we really want it to be addressing the same hazard. If you're looking at project bundling, to address hazards that are completely distinct. Let's say you want to do some wildfire resiliency, some flood resiliency, some erosion measures. That is too wide of a scope to bundle multiple projects. So as long as it makes sense and as long as you can kind of narrow the scope into one hazard, then project bundling might make sense. But again, that's kind of a case by case approach. So I'd encourage you if you're looking or interested at bundling projects, there's the link in the chat there to book some time with us so we can go over the specificities. But I'd say really think about it in a way that if to complete the project and if to really address a particular climate hazard, it makes sense to bundle some of those, then it might be admissible in that case. But really considering the climate hazard that you're wanting to address.
Perfect, thank you. As another question that we got through the registration, someone asked, what is the most effective way for rural, small population municipalities to get involved in these programs?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that one. Again, another great question. We recognize that these application do take time, they do take energy and effort. So that is exactly our role in the outreach team is to help you put your best foot forward and tell your story in the best way possible and to orient you in where, you know, makes most sense to be putting time and energy. So again, this is an invitation to use us as resources and as your wayfinder. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of resources, so we can help you wayfind and help you put your best foot forward. So the links to book meetings with us are in the chat, and you'll just have to select the local leadership for climate adaptation. There's a few different options in there, but when you select local leadership for climate adaptation, it'll bring you to the right spot.
And maybe as a follow-up for that question, I think this is someone who is this also in a small community who asked, what is the minimum budget amount for implementation project stream?
Do you want to take it or I can, yeah, go
Yeah,
for
yeah,
it.
you want to take it? I don't mind.
Yeah, so no minimum
Yeah, no
for in
minimum.
terms of yeah, there's no minimum for the implementation stream. So as long as your project addresses something that's important to your community and that is reflected in your climate adaptation plan or in your risk assessment, that's really what we're looking for. So no minimum project budget. No project is too small for the adaptation and action stream. So.
And I shall add too, to what Agat was saying is our funding is not even necessarily geared towards big municipalities. We want to encourage small municipalities to apply. That's why we have cost share incentives for you. So if you are a small municipality, don't think that your project isn't big enough or interesting enough. We want to fund those. We get all sorts of different projects. So even if you're just a little bit interested, just schedule a call with Agat and you guys can chat and figure out if your project is eligible. But we want those small projects coming in just as much as the big ones.
Perfect. I think that's a really nice note to end the Q&A on. And I'll pass it back to you to take us through the last few slides.
Right, we'll get to the next slide. Um, so thanks again for all your questions and for joining us today. So now that we've gone over the funding opportunity and you've gotten to hear about some of the projects that Agat went over, you might be wondering how you can actually access funding for your own projects. So please feel free to use any of the QR codes here to access information regarding the funding initiative that we discussed. We also have links for the LLCA funding webpage, the implementation funding page, and the AIA resource library, where you can find a ton of helpful tools to help you get ready for your application. You'll also find the application guides linked on the web pages. I think they were also popped in the chat earlier for more detailed instruction. And to get started, you would first want to complete and submit a pre-application for us to review. So that would kind of be your first step. If you're not sure of where to start, or if your project is even a good fit, like we said earlier, please reach out to our outreach team. They're going to be more than happy to speak to you. You can also just contact us at gmfinfo@fcm.ca, or just using the QR code on the right there, if you prefer an email, just instead of a call. So the key takeaway kind of for the presentation would be that we have funding, we want you to have it, so please don't hesitate to reach out with questions, concerns, anything at all, and we'll help you get through and figure out if we think your project is good, and then get that funding. So yes, thank you very much. I think we have a few other slides. I'm going to pass it back to Agath to close this off. You're on mute.
Sorry, it had to
What
happen once,
happens?
right?
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you. So we're at a really exciting point in time right now where we're currently accepting applications for both feasibility study and implementation projects. So you have until July 14th for feasibility studies and implementation projects until June 16th. There'll be a second call for projects that'll happen in the fall. So again, your best spot to look for those dates will be on our website. They're announced already. You have the ones for the implementation project up on the screen. And for municipalities in Québec, donc pour les municipalités au Québec, à partir du 27 mai, vous allez pouvoir soumettre directement votre demande de financement et plus de détails seront à venir sur notre site web. Donc, on vous encourage à garder un œil ouvert sur notre site web et aussi vous inscrire à notre infolettre. On peut aller, we can go to the next slide. Awesome. So again, as Taryn was inviting you all, please connect with us. We're there for you. We're there to support you throughout the process. So you have there's a generic info email there. You also have our booking links in the chat that will take you directly to our calendars, so you can hold some space there to chat with us. And we'll also drop the link in the chat here for if you'd like to receive the FCM Connect. Awesome. And we can go the next two ones. We'll close quickly with an invitation to our Sustainable Community Awards. So you can join the online event to learn about award categories, nomination, benefits, and past winning projects. So you can just scan the QR code. We'll be holding a session on May 24th and excited to celebrate again the most innovative and environmental initiatives in Canadian municipalities of all sizes. We're closing off with one last slide here to invite you to a free self-paced 10 module, online course designed specifically for municipal practitioners that are interested in building climate resilience within asset management. So awesome resource. It's self-paced, it's free, it's online. You've got the QR code there, and we'll wrap it up with that. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today. And again, feel free to reach out with any questions. We're here to support.